All right, fine. Let's just get this out of the way. I know I'm the villain in this story, but does that really give him the right to treat me like this? Does one monumentally stupid, badly timed comment give him a free pass to just delete me? Because that's what it feels like, an erasure. And before you all come for me with your pitchforks and your perfect relationship advice, you need to understand what I was dealing with. You need to understand Kai. I loved him. I really, truly did. But loving Kai was like trying to have a conversation with a beautifully carved stone wall. For 2 years, he was the undisputed king of passive aggression. He never yelled, he never fought back. He just shut down. An argument with him wasn't an argument. It was a monologue I delivered to his silent, judging face. I would pour my heart out, explain my feelings, beg for some kind of connection, and in return, I would get the holy trinity of emotional unavailability. A tight-lipped nod, a quiet okay, or the soul-crushing single-letter text. K. It was maddening. It was like living in an emotional vacuum where all my energy, all my attempts to connect, were just sucked into a black hole of his unspoken resentment. "What's wrong, Kai?" I'd ask, seeing the storm clouds gathering behind his eyes. "Nothing," he'd say, turning back to his phone, the single word hanging in the air, thick with everything he refused to say. He'd agree to plans just to end a discussion, then drag his feet and sigh his way through the entire event, making sure I knew he was miserable without ever having to admit it. He once forgot to book dinner reservations for my birthday right after we had a tense conversation about money, then looked at me with those wide, innocent eyes and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, it must have slipped my mind." It grinds you down, that kind of silence. It makes you feel unhinged. You start poking, prodding, doing anything you can to get a real, honest-to-God reaction. You start craving a fight, a real, screaming match, because at least anger is a feeling. At least anger is proof that the person you love is still in there, that they still care enough to be mad. It gets to a point where you feel like you have to light a firework in the living room just to make them look up from their phone. So when I said what I said at that family dinner, it didn't come from a place of malice. Not really. It came from a place of desperation. It came from 2 years of being met with a polite, infuriating, impenetrable wall. I was trying to provoke him, to shake him, to make him finally be there in the room with me. I know it was the wrong way. God, do I know that now? But I had tried everything else. This all came to a head at his family's annual get-together. It wasn't just a casual barbecue. It was the Kai Olsen Family Summit, a yearly performance review where everyone's life choices were silently judged over dry roast beef and lukewarm gravy. His family is a lot. They're a clan of overachievers, doctors, investment bankers, lawyers, people who view the world in spreadsheets and 5-year plans. They're not bad people, just intensely practical. They speak the language of promotions and stock portfolios, not passion projects. And then there was Kai. My sweet, gentle, infuriatingly quiet Kai, with his dream. Kai's passion, his entire world outside of his day job in data entry, was restoring antique automata. Music boxes, singing birds, intricate clockwork figures. He had this magical ability to bring these delicate, forgotten things back to life. His workshop was a tiny, cluttered room in our apartment that smelled of old wood, metal polish, and ozone. It was his sanctuary. For me, it was initially the most enchanting thing about him. I loved watching his long, steady fingers work, seeing the focused line of his brow as he coaxed a century-old mechanism back into motion. But for his family, it was a cute hobby. That was the exact phrase his mother used, with a tight, dismissive smile. A quaint little pastime for a boy who hadn't quite figured out his real career path yet. At every family gathering, the topic would inevitably surface, usually brought up by his Uncle Robert, the banker. It was never hostile, but it was dripping with condescension. "Still tinkering with your little toys, Kai?" he'd ask, a jovial tone failing to mask the judgment. And Kai would just shrink. The man I knew, the one who could spend hours patiently explaining the genius of a Breguet escapement, would just fold into himself. He'd mumble something about a new project, stare at his plate, and wait for the conversation to move on. He never defended himself. He never explained that it wasn't just tinkering, that he was preserving history, that he was one of the few people left with this incredible skill. His silence in those moments was a different kind of silence than the one he gave me. It was the silence of shame. I hated it. I hated watching them diminish him. And in my twisted, stressed-out mind, a terrible idea began to form, born from the pressure of my own upbringing where pragmatism was king. I convinced myself that I needed to protect him from his own dream. I thought if I could somehow frame his passion as something he himself didn't take too seriously, a temporary diversion, then they would finally see him as an adult. I thought I could beat them to the punch. By downplaying it myself, I could take the weapon out of their hands. It was a strategy forged in desperation, a misguided attempt to shield him by preemptively landing the blow myself. It was, I now realize, the single stupidest idea I have ever had. The dinner was exactly as I'd predicted, a masterclass in polite hostility. The air in his parents' formal dining room was thick with the scent of overcooked roast beef and old money, heavy and suffocating. We were using the good silver, the kind that feels unnervingly weighty in your hand, as if to remind you of the gravity of the occasion. Kai was seated next to me, a handsome statue in a well-pressed shirt, but he might as well have been on the moon. He'd retreated into that familiar shell, offering monosyllabic answers and polite, empty smiles that never reached his eyes. I was trying, I really was. I complimented his mother's notoriously bland potato salad. I feigned interest in his cousin's dissertation on tax law. I was playing the part of the perfect, supportive girlfriend, all while feeling that familiar knot of frustration tightening in my stomach, a silent scream building behind my teeth. Then Uncle Robert, right on cue, leaned forward with a glint in his eye. He was a predator who enjoyed playing with his food. He dabbed his mouth with a crisp linen napkin, cleared his throat, and aimed his voice down the table like a weapon. "So, Kai," he began, his voice booming with the false bonhomie of a man about to deliver a killing blow. "How's the little clockwork emporium coming along? Turning a profit on those music boxes yet?" The table fell quiet. Every head turned towards Kai. It was a public execution disguised as a casual question. I saw Kai's shoulders tense, the subtle way his spine straightened in defense. I saw him open his mouth, ready to give his usual mumbled, self-deprecating non-answer that would satisfy no one and only confirm their pity. And in that split second, my horribly misguided protective instinct took over. "This is it," a voice in my head screamed. "This is my chance to fix this, to save him from them, to save him from himself. I would show them he wasn't a dreamer, he was one of them. I'd land the punchline myself, so they couldn't." It was a strategy forged in the crucible of my own family's pragmatism, a twisted act of love. I jumped in, forcing a bright, airy laugh that sounded brittle and sharp even to my own ears. "Oh, Robert, you know how he is with his projects," I said, waving a dismissive hand as if shooing away a fly. I reached over and patted Kai's arm, a gesture meant to look affectionate but felt, I now realize, like a condescending restraint. We all know it's just his little play-pretend game, a way to keep busy before he buckles down and finds a real, stable career. The silence that followed was no longer polite. It was a dense, suffocating blanket of pure, unadulterated shock. The sound of a fork scraping against a plate stopped mid-scrape. I saw his mother's hand freeze on its way to her wine glass. Uncle Robert leaned back in his chair, a flicker of a triumphant smirk on his lips. I had done his dirty work for him. But in my delusion, I thought the silence was thoughtful. I thought I was winning them over. So I plowed on, desperate to fill the void, digging my own grave deeper with every syllable. "He's actually been looking into project management courses, haven't you, honey?" I squeezed his arm, a gesture of false solidarity. "He knows the whole automaton thing is just a phase. It's adorable, really, but it's not a future." The word adorable hung in the air, grotesque and insulting, a verbal poison dart. I finally turned to look at Kai, expecting, I don't know what. A flicker of gratitude, a subtle nod of understanding that I was playing a strategic game for his benefit. What I saw shattered my delusion. There was no anger in his face, no fight, no hint of the screaming match I had so often craved. There was just absence. His face was a perfect, placid mask of emptiness. He looked at me, but his gaze went through me as if I had suddenly become transparent, irrelevant. His eyes, the warm, brown eyes that held all the light and passion I had fallen in love with, were now just polished, empty stones. The light was gone. It didn't just flicker. It was extinguished, completely and irrevocably, as if I had reached into his chest and personally snuffed it out. He didn't say a word. He just held my gaze for a long, hollow moment, and in that crushing silence, I felt the invisible thread that connected us snap. He had finally given me a real, undeniable reaction. It was the reaction of a man witnessing a murder, and I was the one holding the knife. The drive home was a new dimension of silence. It wasn't Kai's usual passive-aggressive quiet, the kind that buzzed with unspoken complaints. This was a dead, sterile silence, the silence of a vacuum. The air in the car was so heavy and cold it felt hard to breathe. I kept glancing over at him, his hands fixed on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, his profile a rigid silhouette against the passing streetlights. He just stared straight ahead, his jaw set like stone. "I was just trying to get them off your back," I said, my voice sounding thin and reedy. No response. The engine hummed. "You know how they are," I tried again, a desperate edge creeping in. "I thought if I made it sound like a joke, they'd move on. I was trying to help you, Kai." He didn't even blink. It was like I was a ghost whispering in his ear, completely unheard. When we pulled into our apartment building's garage, he turned off the ignition, and the sudden lack of engine noise was deafening. He sat there for a full minute before finally unbuckling his seatbelt and getting out of the car, all without a single glance in my direction. The moment we walked through our front door, the dam of his silence broke, but not in the way I ever wanted. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse. He just walked calmly into our bedroom and pulled his old duffel bag from the top of the closet. The sound of the zipper sliding open was like a gunshot in the quiet apartment. "What are you doing?" I asked, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs. He began pulling clothes from his drawers, t-shirts, socks, jeans, folding them with a detached, methodical precision. "Kai, stop it. Talk to me." My voice was rising, bordering on hysteria. "This is ridiculous. It was a stupid comment, I get it, I'm sorry. But you can't just..." He finally stopped and looked at me. His face was calm, eerily so. "They've been chipping away at it my whole life, Nora," he said, his voice low and steady, devoid of any emotion. "Every joke, every condescending question. But I could handle it, because I thought you, of all people, understood." He picked up a stack of folded shirts and placed them in the bag. "But tonight, you didn't just chip away at it. You took a sledgehammer and you smashed it into dust. You did it for them. You killed the only part of me that I actually liked, and you did it with a smile." He zipped the bag shut and walked past me towards the door. He picked up his keys from the bowl on the entryway table. "So this is it?" I choked out, tears finally blurring my vision. 2 years, and you're just walking away over one sentence." He paused with his hand on the doorknob, but didn't turn around. "It was never just one sentence," he said softly. Then he opened the door and walked out, closing it gently behind him. There was no slam, no final, angry word. Just a quiet click. The finality of that click was absolute. An hour later, my panic texts went from blue to green. His profile picture on every social media app vanished. When I tried to call, it went straight to a generic, automated voice telling me the number was no longer in service. He hadn't just left. He had surgically removed himself from my life. The next few days were a blur of adrenaline and denial. I oscillated wildly between righteous anger and a cold, creeping panic. One minute I'd be pacing the apartment, ranting to myself about how he was overreacting, how emotionally stunted he was to throw away 2 years over a single misstep. "This is what he does," I'd say to the empty room. "He runs away instead of communicating." The next, I'd be curled up on the couch, staring at my phone, my thumb hovering over his grayed-out contact, a hollow ache in my chest so profound it felt like a physical injury. I was convinced he was just making a point. It was the ultimate act of passive aggression, a grand gesture of silence designed to punish me. He'd be back in a week, I told myself, once he'd made me suffer enough. He just needed to cool off. By day 4, the anger was gone, replaced entirely by a gnawing desperation. I needed to get through to him. I needed to make him understand. That's when I called Isla. Isla was our mutual friend, the one who had introduced us. She was the Switzerland of our friend group, always neutral, always reasonable. I called her in a flood of tears, pouring out my carefully constructed narrative of the evening. I painted myself as the victim of his suffocating silence, the well-intentioned girlfriend who made a tactical error under pressure. I expected sympathy. I expected her to say, "Oh, Nora, he's being so dramatic. I'll talk to him." Instead, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Nora," she finally said, and her tone was not warm. It was flat and weary, the sound of a friend who was tired of making excuses. "No, just no. You don't get to do that." "Do what?" I asked, my voice small. "You don't get to blame this on his communication style," she said, her words sharp and precise. Was he perfect? No. But this wasn't about him being passive-aggressive. This was about what you did. His family has been belittling that part of him his entire life. It was his biggest insecurity, his deepest wound. And his only defense, the only thing that made it bearable, was the belief that at least you were in his corner. That you saw the value in it, even if they didn't. You weren't just another voice in the crowd, Nora. You were supposed to be his one safe harbor. Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking all the air out of my lungs and all the self-righteousness out of my head. The flimsy walls of my justification crumbled, leaving me exposed and ashamed. Then she delivered the final, devastating echo. "He called me that night after he left," she said quietly. "He wasn't angry, he was just broken. Do you know what he told me a few months ago after his dad offered him a real job in logistics? He said, 'It doesn't matter what they think. As long as Nora believes in what I'm doing, as long as she still sees the magic in it, I can handle the rest of the world.' I guess that's not true anymore. I'm out with my friends now, at some loud, trendy bar with cocktails that cost $20 and taste like sugary regret. They're all rallying around me, playing their parts perfectly. 'Good riddance,' Chloe says, clinking her glass against mine. 'You don't need a man-child who can't handle a little joke. You're better off without him.' I'm nodding, smiling, playing my part too. I'm the tough, resilient woman who's been set free. "Exactly," I say, forcing a laugh that feels like swallowing glass. "Who wants to be with someone who'd rather play with toys than build a future? I need an adult partner, not another project to manage." The words taste like ash in my mouth, but they keep coming. I'm performing, putting on a brave face, saying all the things a scorned woman is supposed to say. My friends buy it. They see the version of me I want them to see. Unapologetic, empowered, already moving on. But it's all a lie. Later, I stumble back into the apartment. The forced bravado evaporates the second the door clicks shut behind me, leaving me alone in the crushing silence. His absence is a physical presence now. It's in the empty space on the shoe rack, the bare hook where his coat used to hang, the hollow indentation on his side of the bed. My eyes land on the bookshelf in the living room. Sitting there, nestled between my paperbacks, is the last project he was working on for me. It's a small, intricate brass bird, a gift for our 2-year anniversary. He'd found it in pieces at a flea market and was painstakingly restoring it. I pick it up. It's cool and heavy in my hand. One of its delicate, clockwork wings is still detached, lying beside it on the shelf, the tiny gears and springs exposed. He never got to finish it. I trace the line of the polished metal feathers with my fingertip, remembering the look of pure joy on his face when he'd first shown me how the mechanism was supposed to work. He was going to make it sing again, and that's when the performance ends. There's no audience here, no friends to reassure, no pride to uphold. The tough talk, the bitter jokes, the entire facade I've built over the last week crumbles into nothing. I sink onto the floor, clutching the broken bird to my chest, and the sobs I've been holding back finally break free. They are silent, ragged, and ugly, shaking my entire body. A single tear splashes onto the brass wing, blurring the intricate metalwork. In the dark, empty apartment, the only sound is the sound of my own heart breaking.